Good evening, my name is Vivian Ariola, and the topic of my final assignment is Margaret Higgins-Sanger, founder and leader of the Planned Parenthood movement. She was influenced to fight for women's rights by her father and observing her life of her mother. Margaret was born in Cumming, New York, to Irish immigrants Michael Hennessy Higgins and Anne Purcell. Her father had immigrated to America as an early teen. He had served in the Civil War, and after his service he became a student. However, he did not finish his studies. He was forced to take up masonry to support a large family. Born and raised Catholic, his views had eventually changed while being in America. He became an atheist. He became an activist as well, speaking out about inequality. Her mother, Anne Purcell Higgins, was a devout Irish Catholic and had immigrated with her family from Ireland to Canada to the United States, where she had met Mr. Higgins. They married in 1869, and it was at the time a woman's role was to care for her husband, her household, and bear children. Anne had 18 pregnancies, and 7 of them were stillbirths. Margaret was the 6th of 11 surviving children. Her mother later died due to complications of tuberculosis at 50 years old. Margaret was determined not to live the life of her mother had, and with the help of her sister she attended college and entered the nursing program at White Plains Hospital. She eventually married architect William Sanger, who had supported Margaret's views. Despite her physical challenges with tuberculosis, Margaret bared 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. Looking for a better life, the Sanger family moved to Greenwich Village in 1910. Oh gosh. When the Sangers moved to Greenwich Village, it was a time of change. It was in the midst of the progressive era to the new era. They moved to a bohemian community of artists, philosophers, writers, and activists for change. During that time period, World War I was in force, where the women's suffrage movement was happening, and there was an apparent gap in between the wealthy, poor, and the struggling farmers. Living conditions for working class were deplorable. Health issues that were pressing were food poisoning, polluted water, and contagious diseases. As a practical nurse in the community, Margaret would go from flat to flat to help care for the sickly. Margaret was a witness to pregnant women bearing many children. She was present for sick babies and stillbirths, as there was not enough medical care for the urban population. To her horror, she was present to the bloody aftermath of women's desperation to abort the fetus due to the inability to care and feed all their children. Having witnessed events in the ill-stricken community, she started writing. Her focused audience was for women. Her message was about sex education and women's health. Her works include What Every Girl Should Know, that she wrote in 1912, as a column in the New York Call. In 1914, she wrote the publication The Women Rebel, a monthly um, pamphlet promoting advocacy for feminism and the right for birth control. It was then Sanger who had coined the term birth control. Her intent was to promote independence and freedom for the working woman. In 1914, under the name Bertha Watson, she wrote the publication Family Limitations. 100,000 copies were published and distributed. She was going to be arrested for violating the Comstock law, and rather than go to jail for 5 years, she had fled to Europe, to England. The Comstock Law of 1873 had outlawed the distribution of articles and or writings that were deemed immoral and obscene. Literature of this nature included erotica, dirty books with assuming cartoons, and the subject matter of contraceptives, sexuality, and sexually transmitted diseases. While in England, Sanger had commiserated with other activists and medical inventors that were passionate about the justification for contraceptives and birth control for the social and economic welfare of the community. When she returned to the United States in 1915, she had received news that her husband, William Sanger, was incarcerated for distribution of Family Limitations. She had come back to face the music for her charges regarding the Comstock Law. The judge then acquitted her of her charges due to the untimely death of her daughter, who fell ill to pneumonia. Not letting tragedy consume her, she was determined to push forward with her agenda. Sanger partnered up with her sister, Ethel Byrne, to open the first birth control clinic in the United States in Brownsville, New York. It was advertised as a secret opening. As the word got out, they were shut down by the police after a few hours for promoting birth control and distribution of contraceptive devices like the diaphragm, suppositories, and douches. Sanger and Byrne were sentenced to jail for violating the Comstock Law again. Byrne had unfortunately died while in jail, and Sanger went on a hunger strike. News had spread of her defiance and drew attention and support from wealthy investors to support her cause. During the whirlwind events of her life, her relationship to William Sanger suffered. They ended in a separation and divorce. Later in 1923, she had met Norris Lee, her second husband. He was an oil man who had funded and supported her efforts for social reform. Fast forward to closer to the present time, in 2013, had commemorated the 100th year anniversary of the Birth Control Center in Brownsville, New York. Sanger's efforts created what is today the Planned Parenthood. Not limiting herself to the United States, she traveled the world to impoverished nations with populations that were on the rise for their support of women, and she had advocated for their personal freedom and independence. On this actual slide, you will see a bit of history of Planned Parenthood. Again, 1916, the first birth control clinic was opened. In 1916, doctors were actually given the permission to issue contraceptives to female patients for medical reasons. Later in 1921, Sanger had established the American Birth Control League. In 1936, birth control was noted no longer to be obscene. And in 1951, research for birth control had started. And in 1960, the first birth control pill was created and introduced to the public. A few things that I did not put on the screen here was the 1927 Supreme Court decision to support the state's rights for sterilization. That case was Buck versus Bell. The decision was deemed one of the worst decisions of Supreme Court. In essence, the states were given the right to decide who were fit to have children, and this practice was called eugenics. By controlling the minority population and those deemed mentally unfit, they were able to determine who could not have children and who could have children. It was known that Sanger-Slee, and there are recordings of this in interview, that Sanger had actually supported the decision. In 1965, mass sterilization was brought to Indian reservations to control the population. Again, this was a form of genocide. Some noted things that did happen in 1967 and 1968. The Underground Railroad for women seeking safe and legal abortions was created. This was actually backed by clergymen in New York who were helping women look for safe and safe abortions. In Chicago, the Jane Collective was actually created for the same reasons. Of course, the movement for women's health has had its share of opposition and violence. Pro-life groups, Christian groups have responded to the mission of Planned Parenthood as seeing them be a pro-abortionist. The fact is that Planned Parenthood is to support women's health, which includes reproductive health, and the support for women who choose to have their babies. In conclusion of Margaret's efforts, it created the freedom and independence for women. She lived to see her main goals achieved. The birth control pill came to fruition in 1960, and the Comstock Law was overturned in 1965. Seeing her dreams to reality, she had passed away in 1966, a year later in Tucson, Arizona. As women, we are thankful for her efforts for women to have a right to choose pro-choice. A quote that I'll leave you with this evening is a quote by Margaret Sanger. And her quote is, "No woman can call herself free who does not control her own body. No woman can call herself free until she can choose consciously whether she will or will not be a mother." I'd like to just thank you tonight for listening to me. I'm a little bit nervous and I do have a sore throat. But I wanted to just leave you this in closing, that